And so welcome everyone to this, our the Lawyers Division webinar for Ukrainian lawyers in the UK. And we have 4 speakers talking about their various paths into and through the legal profession. And I'll turn to each one to introduce themselves briefly before we get on to their various journeys. And so I guess in alphabetical order, Amanda, would you care to go first?
Yes, of course. For starters, thank you so much for having me. I came to the UK from Canada in 2013, where I studied undergraduate law at the University of Exeter. After that, I worked at a litigation fund and a series of law firms in legal project management. Alongside the new route to qualification, the SQE, I completed my 2 years of qualifying work experience at a combination of different firms, which is quite unique and which isn't usually the case with the conventional training contract. And I'm now starting a new role at PwC in legal data and legal technology. My path was probably a bit complex by virtue of being on an abundance of different visas and exciting and character building rather legal battle to get my EU citizenship, which I now am very grateful, which I had, especially in time before to get pre-settled status. With the nature of my role, it's been a combination of case management requiring a foundational knowledge of the law, because to manage cases, you need to understand the subject matter area. And now the area that genuinely interests me the most is large language models in law and AI in law, and effectively the interception of law and data. But that's pretty much
Amanda.
everything for me.
I appreciate that. And so then I guess next alphabetically to introduce yourself briefly and what you currently do and what you look forward to talking about. Blair, would you care to go next?
Thank you, Martin. It's lovely to be here this evening, and apologies for dipping in and out. I think I've now got my laptop working, so hopefully we are connected and I won't be disappearing again. So I am currently a senior associate at a city law firm called BDBF, which is a specialist employment law firm. And my pathway to law is initially starting in South Africa. So in the Southern Hemisphere, very different to where we are now. I trained and qualified there, and then I moved here in 2016, and I went through the old SQE, so the QLTS, Qualified Lawyers Transfer Scheme. And I found my way into Unison, which is a trade union, whilst I was studying for my conversion exams, and then went back to private practice in 2019. And in South Africa, we don't really specialize in things. And I understand that Ukrainian law is similar, where you might be what we would call in England a jack of all trades. So I had my beginnings in law generally in litigation and employment law, and also practiced as a notary. So I did many different things and then moved on to specialize more in that employment law box when I moved here. So part of what I'll be talking about today is how I went about the sort of recruitment process and the different avenues that I took before I went back to private practice.
Excellent, Blair, and look forward to hearing more about that. Next up in the alphabet, we have Leila, if you would care to briefly introduce yourself and what you're looking forward to talking about today. You are muted. Unmuted now.
Yeah, great. So I come from another part of the world. Unfortunately, not that far, actually. I come from France. So Paris to London is just like a 2 hours journey in the Eurostar. So not as exotic as Canada or South Africa. But I used to be a French qualified lawyer, very specialized in employment law. And I moved to the UK about 5 years ago. And I kind of consider the QLTS route. I actually paid for courses and registered for the exam, and then COVID hit. and I had a turn in my career, and I decided not to go ahead with the QLTS or SQE. So I think this is as well like interesting backstory compared to, and I feel very fulfilled I still identify as a qualified lawyer, and I worked most of the time for global law firms or global in-house, as an in-house, like for global companies before I moved to legal tech. And I thought that actually they were hiring me because I was specialized in a civil law jurisdiction, and I was working actually for in cross jurisdiction type of work. So it actually, I didn't need UK qualification, and that's why I actually just decided that my French qualification was enough, related to the work I was doing. And moving to legal innovation is more about transferable skills. It's about what you can bring to the table, and not really like your degree, like your qualification, because it's a lot of things that we can learn on the spot anyways. So yeah, I'm just for today, I hope that what I can bring to the table is different routes for people, rather than just the SQE that, you know, I was as well like considering, and how we can have like a fulfilling career even without qualifying in too many countries, even though it's actually quite important, because the UK has still like a rigid system if you want to work in a normal role, but there are like other routes. And I'm so now I'm in between opportunities, so that's why I cannot like name like a employer for a permanent job. But I also founded recently something called Beautiful Souls in Legal Tech, and I am promoting diversity and inclusion in the legal space, and I'm trying to break stigma one tiara at a time. So this is what I'm doing for a living, like building community and trying to make the legal industry a safer space.
And remember to unmute myself. Thank you, Leila. So looking forward to hearing more about your legal taken into this jurisdiction. And lastly, the speaker, Seema. Would you care to introduce yourself or what you're going to be talking about today?
Thanks, Martin. Yeah. Leila doesn't have to worry about being the least exotic. So all of my legal education has been in England. So everyone else is much more exotic than my story. But I'm on the Surrey Junior Lawyers Committee with Martin. I'm the SQE rep. So he asked me to come on and maybe talk a little bit about my journey with SQE. Having had my education in England, I've obviously gone through parts 1 and 2 and done the qualifying work experience. So I can give some insight on that. But my legal career path has been a bit alternative compared to the traditional here. So I started as a legal secretary at my firm and did my legal education part-time over about 7 years, and then qualified through the SQE last year. And I work at Howell Jones as a commercial property solicitor in Surrey.
Thank you for that, Seema. And so now, you've heard about what our speakers will talk about, and so yes, and so we've got a number of common issues, but as mentioned, that's coming to the English jurisdiction quite a few differences, not least the notion of having to specialize in an area of law rather than do a number of areas of law, but also about the various types of careers which are relevant to law, like in Amanda's case, legal project management, and Leila Gharbi from legal tech and design. And so our first move, again, alphabetical. Amanda, care to introduce more about your journey into law and things that would be particularly useful for our audience to know in terms of trying to find not only, for example, what I think as traditional legal work, but also jobs like legal project management and specifically where you don't have to be a solicitor to be working in the law, because that's such a key part of trying to work your way up to being a solicitor?
Yeah, so the area that I'm in, legal project management and legal and tech, it wasn't with the objective to become a solicitor. I became a solicitor because I thought if I'm able to do it, it would help me with my job, but that wasn't actually the end goal. In terms of my journey and what I did is, I think what's most important is stakeholder management. And when you're working on a large high stake litigation or M&A transaction, there's the project management is just as important as the legal advice to a certain extent, the delivery of the work, focusing on the process from, let's say if it's an M&A transaction, scoping the transaction, and getting a team together of all the specialists from competition, data privacy, IP, finding the key issues, dealing with them, communicating with the client, having the steps, plans, and all the moving parts together. It's almost like a bunch of puzzle pieces coming and assembling. Just how in litigation, having a clear path to litigation, if it's a class action, a huge amount of project management as well, being highly organized, understanding the commercial objectives of the client, what they want to achieve if they're doing a joint venture, or say what they want to achieve if it's a litigation. Sometimes it, believe it or not, isn't just about the money, and it's just as much equally about principle. But establishing strong relationships with the different teams, from business development to the lawyers, advising on the best use of tech and the way to execute processes most effectively. Like, for example, if in an M&A transaction, working on a verification exercise, saying, well, what app are we going to use to do this most effectively? Are we going to use Atticus, for example, or working in disputes and working closely with the e-discovery team and picking a tool to do the inspection or discovery part of the deal. But I would say overall, the most important thing is establishing relationships and being a trusted advisor. It's very common now that a lot of clients also request legal project managers, and a lot of clients, especially the banks, have their own legal project managers. I'm open to any questions or comments.
Thank you for that, Amanda. That I'm certainly noting down my own questions to ask you in the Q&A section, and also for those attending, that if you have any questions, do bear them in mind for the Q&A section, so then we can go straight into them. And so then next on the alphabet, we've got Blair. You had to tell us more about your journey into this jurisdiction and what helped you along the way.
Sure. So when I started, I'd qualified in South Africa. So the easiest route for me to cross-qualify was to do the QLTS, which is now the SQE. However, I knew that in order to do that, I was going to need a lot of time to work through the course material. And what was really helpful and reassuring is to know that there were a lot of different job opportunities out there for someone like me who had a legal background, who was qualified in a different jurisdiction, but didn't necessarily want to jump right back into private practice, and obviously couldn't because I didn't have the sort of solicitor stamp of approval. So what I started doing is, before I even moved to England, I started contacting legal recruiters and asking what types of roles I might be suitable to. And I suppose the beauty about being qualified in another jurisdiction is that sometimes you do have a lot of different skills, as opposed to just being a one-trick pony, if I can use that phrase. So immediately I saw that there were quite a few things that I could do. For example, going into recruitment. With my employment law background, there was perhaps HR opportunities to do in-house. The other thing that I found quite interesting was that I could probably go in-house and do some sort of legal advisory role if that is what I wanted to do. And there's a lot of project-based jobs available for foreign qualified lawyers, for example, to deal with very extensive litigation, class actions like Amanda mentioned, and also transactional work. So if there is a very big deal that a particular law firm is involved in and it requires a lot of due diligence, and they like to get people in to go through and wade through all the documentation. So there was a lot of project-based work at that time, and we are talking quite a few years ago now, but as far as I understand it, that sort of opportunity is still available. So that was some of the things that I looked at when I moved over. And through one of the recruiters, I got the opportunity to work at Unison, which is a trade union, one of the biggest in the UK, and they have an in-house legal team. And that is what I ended up choosing because it really suited the fact that I wanted to go back to private practice eventually, and it dovetailed really nicely with my studies. It wasn't a role that was too demanding. For example, being in one of the Magic Circle firms, I think I would have been quite busy if I was involved in very demanding litigation and review projects. It would have been quite challenging. So being at Unison, not to say that I didn't really do anything, I didn't rest on my laurels at all. It was still very demanding, but not sort of as demanding as it would have been in a Magic Circle setup. So it gave me the space I needed to study, and also gave me exposure to really, really knowledgeable solicitors who I could speak to about the exams, who I could speak to about questions and past papers. And that just helped me ease into the process and gave me the space that I needed to prepare and to study, because these exams are really challenging. And I'm sure some of the other speakers who have done them will go on to the sort of detail that you need to go into and the work that is required to make sure that you're successful in passing, if that is your goal. Now, the other thing that I did want to say is that I was quite passionate about becoming a solicitor, and I did want to stay in practice. So that's why I decided to take that route. But what being at Unison made me realise is that there is a lot of opportunity out there for people who choose to go on different paths and perhaps not qualify as a solicitor. And even when I did qualify, they asked me if I would consider staying on as a legal advisor, because I think it was just a very nice environment, and that the work that I was doing was really fulfilling. I felt like I was making a difference. So there are a lot of opportunities, and I think the best advice that I could give people is to really go out and search for them. So I spent a lot of time Googling what sort of transferable skills I had, whether it be my notary experience, whether it be my employment law experience to try and move into an HR direction, whether it was some sort of project management that I could assist with because I had headed up a department in South Africa. All of those little soft skills that we sometimes take for granted as lawyers are very transferable. And it does mean that doors are open, and sometimes it might be a job opportunity that you would not think about. Other positions that I also considered were paralegal positions, and also just doing some administration, so being a legal secretary. It's a very good way to get your foot in the door, and also a very good way to understand whether the legal profession is something that you would like to pursue here, or whether you would prefer to stay in-house or perhaps take a completely different route. For example, working in a bank, maybe going into finance, legal tech, and some of the other options that we'll discuss this evening. And also, the other thing that I want to say is that there's quite a few of the legal societies, bar councils, that are providing opportunities for foreign qualified lawyers, in particular those that are coming from Ukraine. And just from doing a quick Google in preparation for this webinar this evening, I've seen that quite a few of the barrister chambers have offered that sort of opportunity for people to come and work alongside them, and to explore what sort of assistance and help they can give to people that are coming over, which I thought was really good. Keeping eyes open for vacancies on the Law Society website, for example, and sometimes even just approaching firms directly. I did that quite a bit when I was looking for jobs, just to see what projects they were working on, whether they needed anybody to do things like a document review, which is where there's very intense litigation and they need extra hands to go through the disclosure. And that's something that anybody who is a qualified lawyer, or even a law student, would be able to do. Again, it's those transferable skills that we can use. Yeah, so that's sort of what I wanted to share, and very happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Blair. If I look occupied because I'm noting down things you say for questions as well as Amanda. Speaking of Amanda, that I see you've got your hand up, Amanda, or is that for a question?
Yes. Yes, I just wanted to build on what Blair mentioned, that when applying for new jobs, I think it's really important and also helpful to tell the employer what your goals are. So for example, at one of my previous employers, I said, oh, I think I'd like to qualify, and they supported me to do the qualifying work experience. We went through the list of the tasks I've done as an LPM and what the gaps were to fulfill the QWE, so qualifying work experiences with the SQE. And a lot of large firms and even small and boutique firms, if you make your ambitions known, and especially if you align what you want to achieve to the firm, they can also help you with potentially prep courses or having time off to study. If they know that you are working extremely hard and also working and studying to obtain qualification, a good employer will support you. Especially if you're clear about your intentions from the start. So I think it's very important to kind of communicate if you plan to go down that route, so the firm you work for can support you the best way they can.
Thank you for that, Amanda. And so I think that brings us next to Leila. Okay, to talk more about your career journey and what you think would be. Have I been muted this whole time? I thought I was unmuting myself. So I was saying, turning to Leila, that would now would care to talk about more about your career journey, including what you have found, what you think. Did I mute myself? Okay, I'm moving my mouse away. We're doing so many other things that I'm getting distracted, but okay, moving the mouse away. So Leila, that's I'm keeping a very careful eye on the mouse so it doesn't click on the mute button again. So going back to your career journey, tell us a bit more about it and what you think will be helpful for people to know following the similar career path.
So, just give me a minute. You're muted.
Yes, I muted myself when you were speaking. And you're muted too at the moment. So.
What's happening?
Just to check no one's pressed that. You're unmuted now. And muted again. No one's pressing mute on Leila by any chance, are they? Good. Do keep control of your mouses.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you. Yeah,
I don't know what's happening. It's like I unmute myself and then I'm muted back. So
I just had a similar issue, but go ahead.
Yes, hopefully it will be worth the wait. So I actually have a quite interesting story, and I'm not saying that because it's mine. But when I came to the UK about 5 years ago, I was actually a lawyer with a career in France. I had like more than 3 years of experience, and the law firms I was working for was willing to even employ me back after a bit of gap year, the gap year that I took. But somehow something happened in my life, like a lot of people. I went hiking during the summer. I did a 1,000 miles journey. And so this is a story for another day. But after hiking for 2 months, I just figured out that most of the time I avoid traveling or went like trying the work from another country experience because I was afraid. And I speak 5 languages, and I just thought this is a waste of this talent to not to work or try something elsewhere and to improve my English. And I'm quite sure that a lot of you oh my God, sorry. A lot of Ukrainian lawyer would relate to that because English is not my native language. So when I came to the UK, I came actually with no plan. And I was not supposed to stay. I just thought, oh, let me work a bit as a waitress or as a hostess, do something that I like, and like see if I can get a legal job, like a job in legal. And if I cannot, I will just go back to France. But somehow, for some reason, I knew that there was like something more for me. So I struggled for 9 months because I didn't know where to start. I didn't know who to ask for help. I didn't know what to do. All I knew is that I want to try something. So I lost a lot of time because I didn't know on which door I should knock. And maybe as well because I didn't know that if I wanted to stay or not. So but fast forward, after 9 months, I managed to get a first gig in document review, which is the easiest way, on my perspective, from a foreign qualified lawyer to get into like a legal project and be considered as a paralegal or as a lawyer. So that's what I did. And I gathered a few tips for you because when I was thinking of this webinar, I thought, what would I tell to myself like 5 years ago? How can I make sure that what I went through is actually helpful for other people? So I put together a few tips, and just like to give you like a bit of idea of my journey. So I started to work then as a paralegal for document projects, and then I managed to make my way up to qualified lawyer gigs in document projects. So it's all about, most of the time it's due diligence or like a document review projects when there is like a global litigation, and move from French projects to English projects because I had to prove that I was actually good. I was understanding English and I could work on English litigation. And because I come from a civil law jurisdiction, which is different than common law jurisdiction, there was always like this worry of, can't you understand? And actually, like, if you're a good lawyer, you worked on cases that are most of the time way more complex than this project, these document review projects. And it's just up to yourself to kind of keep pushing and keep reminding people that you're actually good. And most of the time, it's just one experience is enough to make other people actually trust you and hire you for the jobs. And the hardest bit is always to get that first company that actually trusts you. So then I worked for in-house, and I really loved it because it was as well, moving to the UK was a way to show my personality, to be really myself and try things out in a country where no one knew me. So I understood that my soft skills, things that made me actually really personable and why people would hire me, is because I had like people skills. I was very good at with analytical skills. I was really good in project management. All these things that made me relevant for a job, rather than being like, okay, I did that in France. I was more like leading with the skill set I had. So then I worked in private practice. I managed to get like every time like a few contracts, a bit like a lawyer in demand. And then I moved to the legal tech space. And this is where I think I had like my light bulb moment, where I understood that there are like so many ways to practice law nowadays. And there are so many paths that we can explore as former lawyers or people that still identify as a lawyer. I still identify as one because it's really embedded in me and in the way I see things. But there are so many ways to be relevant in the legal industry and to use that unique skill set that is yours, to use the resilience, to use like all these things that we consider like, oh, I'm not sure how I could put that in a CV, but being resilient means that you can and going through hardship means that when the companies as well are going through hardship, you have these skills of seeing things through, of having a vision. So here are my top tips that I hope will be helpful for my journey. So the first one that was actually really helpful was CV drafting. So I came from France and I never had an issue being hired. I was always like, every time like people like would hire me just by seeing my CV. And I thought my CV was great. But I understood at some point when I showed it to someone that it was not up to UK standards. And I was adding a picture when in CVs in the UK, you don't add pictures. There were way too much information in certain things. And I had to do like a 2-page CV, something that explains a bit more what I did, because people cannot actually know the differences between like French law and UK law. I needed to convince the future employer that actually and show a bit more about what I did, so they understand the full, they have a better understanding of my skill set and of my accomplishment. So that was my first step. Always ask for help for CV drafting. If there are people that are willing to help you, then go and be like, okay, this is my CV. Or even like try ChatGPT. I tried it recently. It's very actually useful. So put like your accomplishment and like ask AI or most of the and then ask a real human being that have successful experience in being employed to review your CV to make sure that it's actually good. Then the second one, that is, and not because I love networking and I kind of do that for a living now, but networking is really, really important. It is really important not to stay isolated and to speak up when you go to these events, actually to come prepared, like to share your vision, because this is the moment where actually people see you in person, can maybe like have a conversation with you, see, because like most of the time what I figure out as a person that has English for second language, people like somehow they are afraid that you will not understand, anything in paper. When I was working in global conflict before, like when I was in France, I was working for Irish clients. So I'm like, how now I'm not qualified enough when I'm actually living in England. I speak English, my partner speaks English, like I'm actually been working in English like more than French. And so people want to be reassured on the way, on who you are, because people hire people. And even though sometimes it's not like your future employer, by sharing your vision, people are always willing to help. So you might find someone that would get you to the next step, or to share the network with you. So this is like very important and I know that it's a bit stressful, especially when we are in between jobs or when we are not employed, because the first question that people ask is, what do you do? And so this is really stressful when actually what you're doing at the moment is not a job, but you're doing so much more than that. When I told stories to people about how I was a waitress, how I was a brand ambassador, it actually got me my first job in legal tech, because I proved that I had like transferable skills, and now I'm in between jobs, but I've never been as happy as now. And it's not because I cannot be re-employed, it's because I'm taking time to figure out my next steps, and I'm building a business in the meantime and trying to see where exactly the skills I have built so far could be best of use. And so when I present myself, I don't say like, oh, I'm unemployed. I can say that as a joke, but I'm saying that I'm choosing carefully my next opportunity. And this is who I am. This is my vision. Do you know someone who's looking for that type of person? And that is way more powerful. So where to start is actually to start reaching out to ALSP company, to lawyer and domains, like this type of company that are actually looking for lawyers disregarding of their jurisdiction. So that would be the first step. Or companies like Flex, they hire people like paralegal, etc. And they have like really great names. I worked for Evershed Surveillance. I worked for like great company in the UK just by reaching out to LSP and companies like Flex Recruitment. Considering alternative career is my fourth tip. So legal innovation, legal tech, get curious, go to events and learn about project management, change management, all these skills that you might have, and put them, like, make sure that people know about that, prepare your elevator pitch, because these careers are actually still new and they need people. So they will be hiring no matter where you qualified, and it will still put you in the scene in front of other lawyers, in front of and maybe it would be a calling. I mean, for me, legal operations and legal tech is a calling, because I'm actually having an impact directly on the work that lawyers do. And I'm there to improve efficiency, and I'm really vocal about mental health. So I really hope that, you know, it's down the line, it would improve the life of humans. And then so the fifth tip is to aim for global companies that are willing to reach within the EMEA region, or that have a global reach, because this one will not look for UK specific lawyers if you are not willing to qualify in the UK because of pricing. There are like so many things that can be like roadblocks when you are willing to qualify. And I know that because I was broke when I came to the UK. So sometimes we have like so many people say like, why don't you qualify? I actually cannot afford to qualify it for the moment. So there are like so many ways to work in the UK before even exploring the qualification option. And so aiming for global companies, actually, this is where you can say, this is what I'm doing. And most of the Ukrainian lawyers I know were already working in a global type of work. They were not working only for Ukrainian company that were dealing business in Ukraine. So put that in your CV. Make sure that you are the global person. You are someone that people would reach out to if they need to do business in the EMEA. And especially since Brexit, it becomes even more important to have these lawyers that have these global visions, that are used to work in cross-jurisdiction type of litigations or transactions. And then the last tip, which is very free, is personal branding. You can leverage LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a free tool. And if you know that you have knowledge about something and you're great at, I don't know, like employment law, or maybe you worked in commercial transaction, or legal tech, or legal project management is your passion, why don't you start leveraging LinkedIn and put that, and so people would see you as an expert, and like start following people that you would like to be in contact with, personalized messages. So that's my last tips. And if you go on my LinkedIn, you will see that I'm actually very quite active in there. But these are like, when I was thinking of this webinar, the top tips that came to my head. And the last one is obviously free, and you don't need to invest much money on it, just your creativity. So
much, Leila, and just to explain a couple of things that you refer to in case it will be helpful to repeat. So Flex, that's referring to Flex Legal, which is another recruiter and platform which sells itself as trying to get experience for aspiring lawyers. And EMEA stands for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Is that right, Leila?
Yes. Yes.
So that's there can be a lot of alphabet soup and abbreviations or TLAs, 3-letter acronyms in law and other businesses. So I should have possibly mentioned that just in case it was helpful for anyone. And now we move over to Seema, who you may have read about in the February's Law Gazette recently, since among other things, as well as being our SQE representative. Seema is on the advisory board for Barbari's SQE advisory board. And but anyway, enough with introductions. Seema, would you care to tell us more about your journey through law and what you think would be particularly helpful, particularly considering, I think, was it the first of the SQE results, the pass rate was 53%, and the latest ones are 51%. So as one of the people who have passed and become a solicitor via the SQE, tell us more about that.
Yeah, no problem. Just to say, I thought Leila's talk was really good as well. I'm feeling inspired by that. I don't know about everyone else. I've been motivated to do a bit more, put myself out there and network a bit more as well. But yeah, so just by way of background, I started at my firm as a legal secretary, and I had no legal qualifications when I got that role. So I think for anyone thinking, if they're foreign qualified, will they, be able to get into a firm? I think it's possible. I got a few rejections even at that stage, but I know Leila was saying as well about thinking global, but another option to be open to is thinking local as well, I think, because I think small firms have maybe more of a flexibility towards what they're looking for or who they might consider, and maybe a bit less stringent. I don't know if you'd agree, Martin. But yeah, so I also started that role when my daughter was 9 months old. So that's maybe another consideration that people might have if they've got families as well and thinking about working and studying along the way. So that's the way I did it for my degree part-time, and then SQE, like Martin said. I think another thing that's good is that if anyone is looking to build their portfolio of qualifying work experience under SQE, it doesn't matter what your job title is if you are meeting those competencies. So if you obtain a role as a legal secretary, paralegal, you can build up your qualifying work experience, which I think is a positive as well. So again, just being open to different roles. And yeah, so SQE, I think if you are foreign qualified, you can be exempt from part of SQE. I had a look at this as well before tonight just to see if there were any particular considerations, but actually it seems that they would look at it on a case-by-case basis. So again, just if it is your aim to qualify, just being really clear on those steps that you have to take, contacting the SRA. Even I did it when I was trying to qualify because the SQE had never been done before when I had questions on certain things. So yeah, making sure you know in your particular case the steps that you'll need to get through to do that. And then for SQE1, I think I'm guessing if you want to do it, you may know the format, but it's a multiple choice format of questions. And for me, again, I'm not sure about other jurisdictions, but that was a difficult type of assessment to get used to because it covers a broad range of English law in those questions, and it's quite an intense exam. So you want to be as prepared as possible. And then Martin mentioned as well that I'm on the advisory board for Barbary, who are an SQE provider. They are also listed as on the Law Society website as a provider that would be able to give support to Ukrainian lawyers who are looking to qualify through the SQE. So again, if that's your aim, it's worth getting in touch with them, seeing what support there is available, especially in terms of funding, because I know financially the LPC was difficult, and the SQE was supposed to be an improvement on that, but it's still if you want to be fully prepared, it's going to cost still a significant amount, but there is support there to do that. So yeah, those were the kind of main points I wanted to cover, but also just making use of any contacts you do have. So obviously by coming to this webinar and being in touch with Martin, if anyone has any questions specifically on SQE, I'd be happy for you to get in touch with me direct and set up a call on what those questions are. I've done that with other aspiring lawyers. So yeah, if I can help in any way on that, I'd be happy to.
Excellent, Seema, and I see Amanda has her hand up. Amanda, we go to talk.
I was just gonna say it's 11 p.m. where I am, and I'm going to bed because I have to get up at 5 a.m. But thank you so much for having me. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
It's certainly, and that I think one thing that might be helpful as a selling point for some people about legal project management might be if you could describe it in 1 or 2 sentences. And so that's it's possible people, this may be the first time people are hearing about it, and as a good starting point of how to understand what it involves.
Yeah, so legal project management is effectively managing cases, whether it's a high stakes litigation or an M&A, using conventional project management skills, but applying them to the legal context. Any case is highly process driven. There's many moving parts, many contingencies. It's core stakeholder management, serving the best interests of your client, understanding their commercial objectives, and working closely with teams to deliver for the client. In many cases, so much I've seen in M&A transactions in what they call phase codes, or the kind of when they break down a piece of work by tasks, so much time goes to project management. And when you're communicating, and when you are dealing with stakeholders, and when you're progressing a case or finishing off a stage, it's all the parts together, and all the parts of a case are technically a project. So matter delivery, especially with the increase in legal technology, and even one of the SRA rules is to manage. Well, there's quite a few different principles, but in acting in the best interest of your client and in the interest of cost, you can technically argue that if you're not using the most efficient skills to deliver, are you really truly representing your client optimally? If you like, for a good example is in litigation and discovery, it's not possible to do discovery exercises with the same level of precision and just sheer volume that can be done using these tools. So I think that's a really good example.
Thank you, Blair. And M&A, that in case it's helpful to explain to anyone, is mergers and acquisitions. And if you're about to leave, Amanda, it occurs to me as well that to ask everyone, to ask our speakers to pose for a screenshot for us to publicize on social media. Granted, I could just use a screenshot from the recording, but I'll probably use some screenshot from the recording that someone will object to. So that if people pose and smile now, I'll try to take a screenshot, so that I'm not having to. I was going to do this after the later, but we can do it now. And so for a brief moment, I thought I'd closed this Teams meeting, but I just realized I'd minimized it. So if I was looking scared, then that was just me thinking, have I just ended this webinar early? But so do smile and pose, or not necessarily pose, but keep your eyes open. I'm not saying don't blink, but just good. Thank you. And yes, I have it. And so, did anyone have any other questions for Amanda? Do put your hand up or unmute yourself, or otherwise message. And as Owen, Owen also in the chat, I see that it's been asked. Granted, Blair kindly answered, but yes, to reiterate that Barbary, the education provider providing support to Ukrainians, it is Barbary, BARBRI, and
they're amazing. I couldn't do my prep courses without them. They provide structure. They're very accommodating, really good infrastructure. I highly recommend Barbary, and I think with the nature of SQE being so new, I think it's extremely challenging to do the SQE without doing a prep course. And by nature of the Barbary lectures, if you are highly organized, you can say, oh, I'll fit in land law lecture in the morning, 20 minutes, or on my lunch hour do another one, and then put Sundays, for example, to do practice exams. But I couldn't recommend Barbary more. And the other final comments I was going to say, if you do want to qualify, I think one of the first things to do is to look at the QWE and highlight what you've done, and then go to your employers or future employers and determine what you need to do to fill in those gaps and ensure they support you. But those are my final comments. I know they weren't asked for, but I just think that that's extremely important in progressing qualification. But thank you so much for having me, everyone.
Thank you very much for joining us all the way.
Great.
Goodbye
Thank you,
for now,
guys.
Amanda. And
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And for our other speakers who are still staying on for now, although do tell me if you are not. But I see in the chat as well, Blair has kindly linked to the Law Society's webpage explaining various support available for Ukrainian lawyers and firms in England and Wales, Barbary being mentioned among them. Yes, questions. So yes, if do you have any questions for our speakers, do mention them in the chat, or but it's on your camera, or raise your hand. Oh, good, Helena, you've raised your hand. So do put your camera on, or message, and do remember to put your hand down. So unless you want to keep on asking more questions. But yes, fire away, Helena. That's what you want to ask.
Hi, everyone. I hope you hear me all right.
Yes.
Great. First of all, thanks very much to all speakers for sharing your experience and dedicating time to speak to Ukrainian lawyers. It's really appreciated that you do this for us. I would like to start with the question to Leila, if you don't mind. First, well, I thank you, Martin, for clarifying what the abbreviation Flex Legal meant. So I understand it's some kind of legal recruiter who helps with like finding jobs. But I think there was also mentioned something like LCP companies. I might get it wrong, but I would really appreciate if you tell a little bit more, like what kind of companies, what's that?
Yes, so I'm trying to type in the chat in the same time, but it's ALSP and it stands for Alternative Legal Service Providers, such as Integran. I'm going to type all of them there: Integran, Epic, Concilio, Lawyer on Demand, all the ones that come on top of my mind. And these companies are actually used to deal with foreign qualified lawyer in document review projects. So this is actually a good, Chadwick, not actually, who is like on the, I can see like even on the background of Junior Lawyer Division in the Surrey Junior Lawyer Division, Chadwick Knott is actually one as well that works with the project document review. So if I knew that when I started, that would have like saved me a lot of time, because they are looking sometimes either like just like normal English, like document review, or sometimes with some languages skills.
Understood. Thanks very much. Can I also ask, like you mentioned that you were also targeting some in-house positions, and you have French qualifications. So did you try to like to find someone, like some companies that were looking for someone qualified in civil law jurisdiction, or like specifically French law jurisdiction, or how exactly that process went? Because like I've been trying to search for in-house as well, but all I can find is pretty much still UK qualification needed. Yeah, so would be nice to hear on that. Thanks.
Yeah.
And to interrupt, so that if any other speakers, for example, Blair, that in-house document reviewer things, I think you've all touched on as well. So if you want to answer as well, then by all means do so. I will.
Yes. So I would say, as a foreign qualified lawyer, I would always aim for global companies, because most of the time they don't, they're dealing with international transactions. Let's say even I worked for Lime, I worked for Sonedix, and what they were doing were actually dealing with transactions in Italy, in South America, in Japan. So this type of roles, I would go straight to them and present myself as a qualified lawyer. So I'm not being, so that was a tip that someone told me. So I don't say, oh yeah, I'm a French qualified lawyer. I just say, I'm a qualified lawyer with this amount of years of experience in cross-jurisdiction transactions, like for 5 years, 8 years, because now I've been almost like 10 years in the industry. And this is how I present myself. And it's very important to be assertive and to believe in your vision, because I feel like when we are foreign qualified, and especially when, you know, we didn't study English law, English is not our first language, we tend to undermine our skills or to underqualify ourselves, and we're like, oh, sorry, I come from Ukraine, or oh, sorry, I come from France. So I would actually take that off. So it gives you a chance to go to the interview stage and to prove actually and to talk about your accomplishments. So it's about how you present yourself. So I would be like, this is like one of the first tips I would give, and the companies you are looking for. Because if you are looking for a local company like UK One that deals only with local law, by the law, they actually, in order to make you a legal counsel, they need you to be a solicitor. Otherwise, you cannot be a legal counsel. So global companies would always be like something I would aim for. And even I have an experience, I can't tell about that now, it's been like a few years. I was hired by Flex Legal, and one of the job was for a company, for an international company, and they wanted to hire me as a paralegal. But when I saw the job description, I had to deal with, they hired me because I was a French qualified lawyer, and they had to deal with transactions in France, in Bulgaria, in Israel, in different jurisdictions, except the UK. Like the UK bit was like very small. So I insisted and I said, I know they liked my profile. They hired me for a reason. I refuse to be hired as a paralegal. They have to hire me as a legal counsel because this is the jurisdiction they are aiming for. So I don't see why I need to be a solicitor when I'm actually not doing any UK law. So at some point as well, it's about like asking for your worth. And I know that it's stressful because we need to pay the bills, and we like, oh, can I actually say that? But I would advise actually to try and be sometimes a bit more assertive. Even though I didn't negotiate it on the wage, I negotiated on the title. So always like trying to negotiate. That would be my top tip. And now I let the floor to Blair that have for sure more tips.
I think I would second what you've said about trying to approach companies or firms that have a more global footprint. Although in my experience, I was quite lucky that the trade union was sort of as a matter of course, they took foreign qualified lawyers. But I would never have known that if I hadn't gone through a recruitment company. I wouldn't have known to have even approached them. And I think if you get a really good recruitment company behind you, they know the places that are looking for foreign qualified lawyers who are not going to say, well, you don't tick the UK or England and Wales box, we're not taking you. And it does really come down to selling yourself. Like Leila said, you really have to market yourself and use those soft and transferable skills. You need to say, I've got X, Y, and Z. Just because I don't have an England and Wales qualification as a solicitor doesn't mean that I can't still do a particular job, especially if it's something that does have a global footprint. I'm not sure what sort of area of law you work in currently or what you've done before, but a lot of the times there are things that you can do here that aren't necessarily very jurisdictionally specific. So, for example, I was involved in a lot of transactional work in South Africa at a stage. So I put that on my CV as well. Even though I didn't specialize in it, I'd done it for at least a year in terms of practicing in South Africa. So I had some experience, which meant that I could apply for jobs where it was due diligence on a massive transaction. And that sort of thing doesn't always require very specific knowledge about England and Wales jurisdiction. You're looking for specific red flags, and you have those soft skills as a lawyer to identify them. You don't necessarily need to have specific England and Wales qualifications to do that. So yeah, I would be very specific with recruiters as well in terms of what you're looking for, so that they're putting you forward for the right jobs at the right level. Because like you just said, a lot of the times I had experience where they said, "Oh, would you like to be a receptionist?" And no offense to anybody who's a receptionist, I would absolutely have taken the job if I needed to, but it was important for me to try and get some exposure in the right place as well. And I didn't just want to do any old thing. I wanted to make sure that I was being valued as well. So that's where it comes into selling your skills and not just letting them put you into a box because you've qualified somewhere else. You're just as good, and they need to know that. And you know, that's your time to sort of motivate yourself and sell yourself as well.
Very much agreed. And I think touching on something that Leila also referred to among your points, but thinking also to recruiters, that a key thing I hear recruiters, whether for international or domestic people, is that in CVs is not just about it's not necessarily about saying what you did in past jobs. It's not necessarily a description of past jobs. Oh, I see what a fire emoji in the message. So I think that was a reaction to what you said. I mean, it's saying so. Congratulations. But not CV is not just simply a description of what you've been doing in past jobs. The aim is to sell yourself, and so that means often mentioning achievements, but also, particularly if you're international, highlighting how you're already doing the job already. So you often need CVs, but I mean, so domestically for people native to this country who are just starting out, like me when I was working for the civil service before going into law, where I was working, I would often be the first to answer the phone, answer the door to people visiting, and so I expect to do similar things as a paralegal or legal assistant, be the first to pick up the phone and answer the door. And so I mentioned that I was comfortable with that, because the more and more you can try to work out what the job involves and highlight how you are already doing aspects of the job already from your previous work, then it makes it easier for employers to realize, oh, actually, that it would make sense to hire you. And I was going to say something else about recruiters. Oh yes, and not all recruiters are created equal. That there are some recruiters who will have law firms as clients, and they'll be fully aware of their requirements. But there'll be some law firms, some recruiters who will simply take your CV and fire it at law firms, saying, "Oh, this person's looking for a job." But you could have done that yourself, and you didn't need to have a recruiter to do that for you. In fact, the way I first got my job in law was I saw that the firm where I'm still working at now was hiring for an office assistant, but a bit like Leila's networking. I particularly remember you saying, as a waitress, Leila, you were talking to everyone you were meeting as a waitress about your interest in law, and eventually you found someone who could get you into legal tech, as I think you said. That I saw they had a vacancy for an office assistant. It was not a particularly legal or related role, but I said, "Oh, I've done this legal qualification. I'm looking to become a trainee solicitor. Do you have a job that would be relevant for me?" And the response was, "Oh yes, we are about to advertise for a legal assistant role. Would you like to apply for that?" I did. I got the job. In my employment contract said, if you're with us for this many years, you will become a trainee solicitor. And 2 years and a bit later, I became a trainee. I became a solicitor, and I'm almost 3 years qualified now and still working at the same firm. Leila, you have your hand up.
Yes, when you were talking, I just remembered something, that someone told me when I was looking for a job, and she was like, she's a French qualified lawyer, and she was telling me, no one's waiting, no one's expecting me here. And that was like a phrase that was important because since I came in the UK anyways, I put my ego aside and I did like a lot of job that people thought I was too good to do. And I was like, this is totally disrespectful for a lot of people, but I was really happy to have these opportunities because it gave me the opportunity to pay the bills and still stay there in order to fulfill a dream or projects that I have of my own. But that meant that I had to put my ego aside and start somewhere. And if that somewhere is a paralegal, even though, like some people might have like 10 years of experience, and it can be like very frustrating when you worked in global transactions and things in your country, and suddenly you have to be a legal assistant or a paralegal. And what I did, because I was an employment lawyer, so, like in France, employment law is really, really specific and is very complicated. So people invest a lot of money in it because it costs actually a lot of money for employers. But in the UK, the employment law is very different. So what I did is actually use this document review experience where I was totally like doing document review, but making sure that to the project manager, I was showing that I was actually smart enough. I had like analytical skills. And then I would put in my CV that I worked on a financial like litigation. I would put on my CV financial litigation. I would put competition law. And that helped me become like a specialist in corporate law, in commercial law, because all of this experience that you can undermine and be like, oh, but I was just reviewing documents and tick a box if it was relevant or not, then you can say, I actually worked on a financial litigation that actually cost the company $1 million fines. And this is, so changing the narrative, you own the narrative of your CV. So you are able to make this little job look actually bigger. Like, don't think of the task you're doing, but on how was it relevant for the company? Like, what is the size of the transaction? What was actually the matter you were working at on? And that made me from an employment lawyer, French employment lawyer that is quite niche, even though I worked for international company, to a commercial lawyer, to a corporate lawyer. And so that would be my tip. If you're working on small things and paid light with rocks and peas, I don't know how we say it in English to mention that we're not paid that much, but you can still like use that to own your narrative and get to the next step. And nothing is like, if it's not because you accepted this role that is supposed to be permanent. Nothing is permanent. You can move to the next step after, and still looking for the jobs. So yeah, that's that's what came to my mind when you were talking, Martin. I thought that might be relevant.
No need to apologize. It was very relevant, and I saw a lot of nodding going on at what you were saying. I see you still have your hand up. Did you? Is that to say add anything else, or just when you had your hand up before? Incidentally, I see Victoria in the chat has asked about advising which documents are required for Ukrainian certified law attorney to start consulting practice in the UK. If you check Blair's link in the chat, Victoria, I most likely be sending that out by email and social media posts as well. But it does talk about Ukrainians practicing law, whether Ukrainian, international, or English, and provides links to external websites with more information. So I recommend you consult there. I'm particularly mindful that even if we were to check this right now on the webinar, it could be out of date. But it's in the recording, so do always check the up-to-date information, particularly from the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the SRA. But the Law Society does try to help, like with that webpage. Helen, you've got your hand up again.
Yes, I just wanted to share my thoughts on the legal recruiters, because like my partner, he's also a lawyer. He used to be, he's doing remote work for Ukrainian law firm. It's like top tier law firm in Ukraine, but it's not international. And he is counsel in M&A there. So he was trying to find job on a local market, I think for more than half a year here. And he was applying with multiple recruiters for different vacancies. The problem that we've seen, I think out of all applications, multiple applications, only one resulted in interview. And it was also because he knew some people from that firm personally from his current job, because they had some kind of transaction where those people were in it as well. So, and all the stories which I heard from Ukrainians, like successful stories when Ukrainian lawyers got legal jobs here, were somehow involving local people like sponsors or some friends who did some advocating for them. Like, for example, some sponsors could pass the CV to the firm they worked, and that's how it resulted in an interview and then a hiring at the end of the day. So for me, like observing this whole thing, it feels like the legal recruitment doesn't actually work. And I'm not saying that to offend legal recruitment in UK in any way. It's some kind of a bit of pessimistic from observing what I've been seeing with the stories and with my partner. It's like really hard to get the result out of contacting recruiters, because you are doing that, so you put so much effort into that. You tell your story over and over again, but at the end of the day, you don't get interview. And like real success stories is when there is like this personal touch of a local person helping you, specifically you, with your CV and with the particular company that they can, for example, speak with about you. So I would really appreciate if you share some thoughts on this. Like, do you feel that there is an issue with legal recruitment here, and this could be on the way of Ukrainians finding jobs, or it's just some particular, maybe unsuccessful experience of certain Ukrainians, and we should still procure communicating with legal recruiters here and have a hope?
I have my own thoughts on this, but I'll turn to our speakers first.
Yeah, I have thoughts on that because I'm obviously from a French qualified lawyer. I can really relate, and I think I have similar experience with, unfortunately, not with the South African and Australian or Canadian, because English is their first language. So people, and because it's common law, so it's easier in a certain way. And I'm not saying that to undermine any other personal experience, but it's easier to get into that stage because the system of law is similar. But when you come from another system, sometimes like recruiters are not really helpful in the sense that they don't really advocate well for you. They go for the easy solution, except if someone say we accept a foreign qualified lawyer. So that's why I mentioned earlier the tips I would give to anyone is networking, reaching out personally, like personalizing invites on LinkedIn. And even myself, I'm working on a post to say that I'm available for work, and I want to do it in a way that stands out. I'm preparing a carousel to tell about my skills now that I figure out what I want to do next. So sometimes it's about that. It's instead of telling your story to individual people that might not be able to hear it, maybe like try broader, maybe try and the personal branding and telling about what you do, like, it's or how you can help people. So creating content about your accomplishment, or like giving tips to people, that is as well like a way to show thought leaderships, and making sure, like with the recruiter, not being shy and ask, because I used to ask, like, are you really putting my CV in front of people? What can I improve? Like, what are the tips? Why I'm not getting interviews? What can I improve? Like, and people were like, yeah, you are amazing. And I'm like, I heard that like for 6 months, but what would get me to the next stage? And sometimes it's just like that person that would actually really listen. And when they have a job, they would go the extra mile and go to the employer and say, I know that if you see that paper, you'll be like, no, too complicated. I have other already ideal candidates. But they would go the extra mile to say, this person, you need to interview her or him. And so it's to find that recruiter that gives you that feeling of being seen, and not just like, oh yeah, you're great, you find something. And really ask for it is something that I struggle for a lot in my life, being assertive. So it's really saying like, I'm I know what I can bring to the table. Maybe like reviewing the way you do your CV on everyone's CV, like about like accomplishment. So yeah, so that would be my top tips, and networking, and really like trying to share to who you can share your story to, like share your vision and reach out to people. There will be one who will be listening.
Thank you, Leila. Blair, you have your hand up.
So as Martin said earlier, not all recruiters are created equal. And I obviously had a slightly different experience coming over being English speaking. But I did struggle with some recruiters, and I eventually found 3 that I really liked, and who I felt were actually selling me as well. So I would also, to add to what Leila said before, is to try and get the recruiters that are going to represent you. And I found that the ones that actually had a face-to-face interview with me before were the ones that did a really good job for me. So I wasn't just a number, I wasn't an application in a pile of documents. They took the time to meet with me, and then they could understand a bit more of what I could offer. But moving away from recruiters, something else that I did, which I found really useful, was using the jobs tab on LinkedIn. So you can type in different catchphrases and keywords in that jobs tab to sort of narrow down jobs that are advertised on LinkedIn. And I then approached firms directly based on job vacancies that I found on LinkedIn, which I thought I might be suitable for. And I managed to get about, I'd say, 6 or 7 interviews just doing that. And then you're advocating yourself. You know whether you would fit that mold. So that's another alternative than just using recruiters.
Thank you, Blair. And it's possibly a very obvious point, but with recruiters, that with any job, no matter what the seniority, there will be thousands of pounds extra the employer's paying if you to the recruiter if you do get the job. And so, as to reiterate what we've been saying about employers often wanting something simpler than they'll want something cheaper, many good recruiters will be the first to admit this. At the very least, that it can be incredibly helpful to that, as well as finding the right recruiter who will sell you, but also to a recruiter who can then help you tailor your applications and CV. So even if you don't have success with that recruiter, then you are all the more prepared to find jobs in the future. But similarly, that all busy people and trying to organize things like this webinar so that you aren't having to spend a lot of money and time on something. Not being a question asked, but something that's occurred back to me thinking about this SQUE in terms of revision tips. Granted, they're all ways we learn, but Seema, I was thinking that one of the ways I tended to revise best in law was by maybe you've got something similar. Was by reading things out loud 3 times. So if it was like a case to remember or a legal principle, read it out loud. So particularly if it's a case to remember for an exam, read it out loud 3 times, looking at it, close my eyes and try to say it out loud. I always thought the sound of my voice saying something helped me remember it more. And then sort of use that technique of reading a line 3 times out loud, closing your eyes, saying it out loud, and doing it with a few more lines, and then trying to connect those lines or cases all together, having done them a few at a time that you've been able to remember separately, but then reading that in previous exams, like think back to my language exams, I just memorize paragraphs and paragraphs of what to say, and then just wrote it all out, and I applied similar things to my exams. I just sort of did my best to memorize what the cases were, and in the SQE, it's very much about memorization due to the multiple choice that's one of the reasons why they've got multiple choices of essays, because with essays you can only be tested on only so many areas of law at once, but the SQE is designed to try to test you on all different types of areas of law in the areas of law that are being examined on. But did anyone have any other exam tips to recommend? We've talked a lot about finding jobs, but I'm also I'm conscious that some people might be doing the SQE at the moment and would particularly appreciate grant for the SQE one any exam or revision tips, even if it's from things like the QLTS.
I think for SQE1, I found that because it's multiple choice and because there's such a volume of questions, actually practice questions, just doing lots of practice questions was the best way to prepare. And again, different course providers will be able to give those. But as Amanda said, I studied with Barbary and found them really good for that. And I think the other thing is that SRA do have a list of topics that are examined in SQE1. So one thing we were told was to go through all of those topics and see if you can say just a couple of sentences about each of them to show an understanding. And that's kind of the level that you want for SQE1, because there's so much, you're never going to remember absolutely everything. But if you know the general principle for each of those, that's probably a good gauge that you're on the right track. So yeah, those would be mine for SQE1.
That's good. In fact, it reminds me of another revision thing I would do is that I would talk to my family. Sometimes it might be at a meal, or sometimes I would specifically sit down and explain to them the principles in law, other aspects of what I was revising. So because then if I could explain it adequately to them, then it's helped reinforce my confidence in what I was doing. I particularly remember that, for example, with solicitors' accounts, because my dad's was an accountant, and solicitor's accounts were so different from what he might call standard accounts that it was a journey for him as well. Anyone else have anything more to say on revision?
I was just going to say that you shouldn't underestimate the amount of work to get through for these exams if you are going to pursue them. There is a lot of work and material to get through. But also, second what Seema says, the importance of doing those past papers, I cannot stress that enough. It's a very unusual exam technique, especially as lawyers. We're used to arguing that things are grey sometimes because we don't want them to fit in a black or a white box. And when you're answering those multiple choice questions, you're sort of getting 4 or 5 options that differ ever so slightly by a couple of words. So it's a very different way of testing your legal knowledge. So by doing those practice papers, you get more familiar with the exam technique that you'll need to use when you do the actual tests. So that would be one tip that I would share, is just making sure that you don't underestimate the amount of work that needs to go in, and making sure that you do as many practice questions as you can. I fell into the trap with the QLTS, and I understand the format's quite similar, in that I was so worried about getting through all the material, making sure that I knew it all back to front. I didn't do as many practice questions as I should have. And that was definitely where I think I fell down. So the practice questions are really important. I see we've got a question about consulting in the UK. I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not sure that any of the other speakers do, but I think the best advice that I could give you is to probably contact the SRA directly or the Law Society and just find out what the options are, so that you can see whether you can register a company and become self-employed, and see what the options are for doing some legal advisory work. I'd be surprised if you couldn't do that in some way, shape or form, but what you probably wouldn't be able to do is hold yourself out as a solicitor. But there must be a workaround. So I think the best option there is to contact the SRA directly and find out exactly what parameters you'd be operating in and what your options would be.
Very much agreed with you, Blair. Do contact the Law Society and the SRA, which is the Solicitors Regulation Authority, for clarity on that. I actually see we've gone past 9:30, so we it's about time to wrap up. Thank you once again to our speakers. I'm going to be sending you emails or messages as well in the evening or morning to thank you again for your time and experiences. That for my laptop's getting quite hot, and so it probably is relieved at being turned off too. But we're getting thanks in the chat as well for you all, and what I very much want to catch up with some of you afterwards to hear what you've been doing in your personal lives as well, because it's then that can wait until after the webinar, particularly with it being recorded and all. And so I will take this moment to stop the recording and wish goodbye, and stop recording and transcript.